Today, let's have a look at 3 different movements that are very similar. So we've got the crow up to handstand, either freestanding or use the wall if you need to. We have the L sit up to handstand, and that can be done on boxes or P-bars like this, exactly the same, where we start in a bottom position, use a bent arm, push to go up to handstand, and then the same back down. And then we have the bent arm press on the floor. Now, this could be argued is a cheap method to get a press handstand, but basically bending the arms, hips and legs come up into the handstand position, use the wall, and then back down again with some sort of control. Now, I actually believe all 3 of those are very, very similar, both in the technique, but also in the level or the intensity, meaning that if you can do one of them, you can do the other 2 as well. But the key is to make the positions as similar as possible so they all feed each other. Now, I would argue that the easiest one to get first is the crow to handstand. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail and then feed that technique into the other 2 to help unlock those. So for the setup for the crow or frog position, I'm going to have the hands a little bit wider and I'm going to externally rotate them. So I'm going to be in this type position. I'm going to bend the arms enough to create some sort of shelf, and then I'm going to place the knees on that shelf. Now, that is going to be a little bit different for everyone in terms of the position they feel comfortable with, but the main thing we need to focus on is more weight in the arms and the shoulders and the upper back and less weight in the hips and the legs. So what do I mean by that? We don't want to have a position that's like this. See, now I've collapsed basically my hips and my legs onto my arms and it's really, really heavy. I want to have the opposite. So I want to be more lighter on my elbows. So then to come off is much, much easier because I've already got all the weight in the upper body. And we can practice that in lots of different ways by doing that stepping on and off. We could transition weight down and back up like so, using like a seesaw technique. So as the head and shoulders come down, the hips come up. We could try stepping on and off things, whether it's a box or a bench or a wall. So I'm here and I'm stepping on and back off again. So basically getting more and more weight and controlling that upper body and less weight in the legs. And one of the main things to pay attention to is the relationship between the hip and the shoulders. So I want the head and shoulders down a bit and the hips up a bit. I definitely don't want them to have them level, and 100% don't want to have them in this way where the hips are lower than the head and the shoulders, unless I'm going to use momentum to get me up. So I'd have a play around with those things and then just basically set up like this and see whether you can push up to the wall. If you can, fantastic. You've got a crow to handstand, you're ready to start playing with the others. If you can't, you might need to play around with different variations, being chest to wall, walking up and down, that type of thing. Back to wall using some momentum. So now we're going to drop the head and the shoulders fast and lift the hips up quickly. So like this, reach over to the wall, see if you can get up that way. Or it could be if you're really struggling, you need to work on your push strength. You need to work on your dips, your pike push-ups, and some of the easier handstand push-up progressions. But let's now move on and look at the other 2. So we have the L-sit through to handstand. Now I'm using these P-bars, but you could use IKEA steps, little boxes, benches, chairs, and everything in between. We obviously need an L-sit, and I'd highly recommend that while learning this, you stay with a tuck position. The tuck position is just going to make more of a ball between your... tuck position is just going to make more of a tight ball that easily rotates, because we want to rotate from the L-sit through to that same position that we use for the crow to handstand. Now that's really important. So that position where the hips were slightly higher than the shoulders, we had a certain amount of bend in the elbows and a certain amount of weight distribution in the hands. If we can have that exactly the same, when we come out of the L-sit to it, it's going to feel very familiar, and I'm just going to push out of that position. So from this position, look, there's the same position because I've gone into the crow frog and I can even go up. So that could be a drill. Is I could go from the L-sit position, land on the crow, then do a crow to handstand. Now, one of the things that you might not have if you haven't worked it already is a handstand, or be comfortable to do a handstand on the raised surface. If that's the case, you need to start to learn that as quick as possible, because that's going to really hinder you, because your body's not going to want to go up onto the higher platform if you're not used to it and your body's not comfortable there. It's going to try and go in opposite directions. But what you often see now is that people will go from the L-sit position through to this position, and this is really hard to push out of. So we're making it like a deficit handstand push-up. And if you don't have a deficit handstand push-up, it's going to be near on impossible to push out to handstand. So we don't want to do that. We want to try and have that elevated position, very similar to the crow. We're already nearly halfway up on the movement. So when I come through, I'm here. Now this is much easier to push out of into my handstand. Now, same as usual with all the calisthenic skills, the eccentric is easier than the concentric. So if you're struggling, just do the eccentric. Start in the handstand position, whether it's freestanding or against the wall, and then see if you can come down, back through, pass through the crow position into the L sit. So if you use enough momentum, if you get the hip and the legs high enough, that one is just as easy as the crow to handstand, but those things need to be in place. If you do that sunken position, it's going to be way harder. Then we have the bent arm press to handstand. And again, we want to follow the same rules. So when I'm setting up for this, I want it to actually be exactly the same as my crow to handstand. So if my crow to handstand is there, here is my bent arm press. See how it's relatively the same. I'm just not putting the knees on the arms before I go. I'm just dropping the head and shoulders a little bit, which pulls the hip up, which floats the feet, which allows me to use the overbalance to get me up. Now, using the overbalance is really, really important. We don't want to be hanging back over here and dragging ourselves up. We want to be going this way, nearly falling over and pushing at the same time. So if I can use that to whip me up, see how I was nearly going too far this way. If I push at the right time, that's just going to help me out of the position and send me up to handstand. You just do have to be careful that you don't hit the wall too hard. If not, every time you do it freestanding, you're going to fall overbalanced. But very similar to the L sit to handstand, if my position's much lower, it's going to be really hard to push out of that position. But if my position's higher, like that crow position, there it is, it's much easier. Again, we could do an eccentric. We could make ourselves stronger with crow to handstand. We can make ourselves stronger with the dips, the handstand push-up variations, the pike push-ups and things like that. Now, if you're already nice and strong, one of the main things that will be holding you back is your balance. I highly recommend that you're spending loads of time getting into a position where you can do this type of control in a handstand. If you can do this and move around and change between overbalance and underbalance positions and have so much room for error, going up and down out of that position is so much easier, and you're not going to fall and struggle to stay up and get reps and sets done. You're going to have so much room for error, and it's basically just going to make everything so much easier. So let me know down in the comments if you have any questions on this one. Let me know if you can do 1, 2, or 3 of those. If you need help with your training, check out my app or my website for online coaching, and I'll speak to you in the next one.